Hello, and welcome to yet another Final Fantasy XIV guide. Today, we're covering healing. As with the guide on tanking, we will not be covering individual class abilities or specific runs, but rather focus on transferable skills and knowledge that should work for a variety of fights and content. So without further ado, let's get into it. We'll be briefly covering the 3 current healer jobs and the base classes, the healer role abilities, the general pace of most fights, dungeon healing, trial and 8-man healing, and 24-man raid healing. As always with these videos, I will put in timestamps and chapters for the various topics. It goes without saying that since Endwalker is introducing a new healer and a healer class split, this information might change as the expansion drops, but a lot of what you find should stay the same. At the time of recording, there are 3 different healing jobs: White Mage, whose base class is Conjurer, Scholar, whose base class is Arcanist, and Astrologian, which is a standalone class. So in Endwalker, they will be joined by the Sage, which, after the split, will be a shield-focused healer alongside Scholar, while Astrologian and White Mage will become something more akin to pure healers, which likely means slight or extensive reworks of the respective kits. Regardless, at the time, the White Mage is a healer capable of outputting high amounts of healing through global cooldowns and off-global cooldowns both, in addition to a very simple damage rotation that lets them play very reactively. The Scholar uses pets to supplement their healing and focuses on proactive play through shields and buffs. Though this will change in Endwalker, Astrologians at the time have access to both diurnal and nocturnal sects, though they cannot both be active at once. Depending on the sect, they will be able to cast into regions or shields. Furthermore, the Astrologian has access to a variety of offensive and defensive buffs, currently seeing them off as a jack-of-all-trades founding class. If you're new to healing and are looking to just get comfortable with it, I would recommend the White Mage, as their ability to put out massive team-wide heals, their virtually limitless MP pool, and overall flexibility gives you a lot of leeway when trying to learn fight. On the flip side, more experienced players might have more fun with other classes as their raid-wide DPS and support options are generally more diverse and requires more finesse. However, as Final Fantasy XIV is well known for, every instance can be completed as any class, and by reading the tooltips and knowing what your abilities do, you should be able to use your chosen class to the fullest. At the time, all healers have access to 6 role action. Repose, which can put targets to sleep until they take damage. This ability does not work on most major bosses or enemies. Asuna, which clears debuffs. Debuffs which can be Asuna will show up with a thin, white line over it. Swift Cast, which lets you cast your next spell instantly. It's mostly used in conjunction with Raise, Resurrection, or Ascend in order to instantly revive a dead party member. Lucid Dreaming, which gives a significant boost to MP regeneration, best used at around 80% MP while fighting for maximum effect and uptime. Surecast, which makes you immune to most movement abilities for a short time, as well as conferring an immunity to most interruptions. And lastly, Rescue, which lets you pull a single party member towards you. Use this with care and remember that it takes a split second to take effect. While the pace of a fight typically relies heavily on the individual mechanics of the fight you're currently fighting, there are a few things that remains true about most fights. First and foremost, you might have noticed that your basic attacks and most of your abilities have a cooldown, otherwise referred to as a global cooldown. For basic attacks and ambient damage, this is true for every single enemy as well. Unless your party members get hit by avoidable AoEs, incoming damage is never random. This means that the trained eye can more easily judge when your healing needs to land. Keep in mind that most heals, especially party-wide healing and emergency heals such as Benediction, suffers a slight delay from when the heal goes off to when it lands. So this shouldn't be an excuse to let your party edge on the brink of death, but you can definitely plan to your advantage. Secondly, most fights follow the same formula. There is an initial 30-second period where no particular boss mechanics go out, before moving into a pattern of Tank Buster, party-wide damage, Tank Buster, and so on. Some fights can double down and fire off several instances of Tank Busters and party-wide damage in a row. As a general rule, this means that your party won't have to be topped up after damage instance goes out. For example, if a party-wide attack has just gone out and you know the fight won't follow it up with another, a party-wide regen ability, plus natural health regen, is all it takes to see the party on comfortable health come the next damage instance, or vice versa with the tank, instead offering you valuable time to focus on whichever damage instance comes next. Finally, most tank busters and instances of party-wide damage will feature cast bars under the boss's health bar, which can be monitored if you run the boss as a focus target, giving you a direct feed of whatever is going to happen next. Since many of these abilities have ground or character markers, there are several ways of knowing what comes next. Over the course of your healing career, you will doubtlessly encounter situations in which players die. Your resurrection priority should be as follows: 1. One tank. 2 healers, 3 additional tanks, then the rest of the party. For a healer, the overall aspect of the dungeon is potentially the least regular experience. Quickly weaving between enemy pulls and boss encounters forces you to quickly shift between 2 healing mentalities. In most non-leveling content such as 50, 60, 70 and 80 dungeons, if your tank pulls a one-on-one group, a regen or a shield will suffice to let you apply damage when it's necessary. However, if your tank decides to mass pull, regens, damage mitigation abilities such as shields or temperance, and active healing will be important when keeping your tank alive, allowing you less time to do damage. As with most other classes, you should be using your AoE damage abilities when facing 4 enemies or more, while a single target rotation will be more effective against 3 enemies or less. The exception is the White Mage, whose AoE ability wholly can not only stun an enemy 3 times for a total of 6 to 9 seconds of complete damage mitigation, but also hits the AoE sweet spot at 3 enemies or more. Generally, the DPS should be taking very little damage during the monster pulls. However, the change paces when fighting bosses. Generally, the bosses follow the previously mentioned patterns. 15 to 30 seconds of very few or little mechanics and damage, then weaving tank busters and party-wide damage, with some encounters being far more intense than others. Bosses are also big unavoidable damage, which requires particular attention whenever one of your party members get hit by them, as they will often result in a vulnerability up, causing them to take more damage in addition to having less health to hit. Save for the initial Ifrit, Titan, and Garuda, all of your trials and 8-man raids will feature 8 players, typically 2 tanks, 2 healers, and 4 DPS. More often than not, when 2 healers are paired together, one will focus on damage, while the other will focus on healing. It is a fine balance to hit, and if you notice your party constantly staying on low health, you might want to pick up on your healing, as a lot of 8-man content is damage intensive. Following the aforementioned pace, most of these encounters start with a 30-second grace period in which only basic attacks or avoidable AoE attacks are thrown out, before running into a pace in which it weaves tank busters and party-wide damage. Your 3 main tasks is to A. Keep the tanks healthy ahead of tank busters, B. Heal your party after instances of party-wide damage, and C. Heal and or revive players who took avoidable damage. On occasion, these fights will include instances of heavy, continuous party-wide damage, such as Nidhogg's Act Morns, Eden Refulgence's back-to-back absolute zeros, or Eden Promises Titan and Shiva junctions, which will require you to push out high amounts of AoE healing. More rarely, these fights will feature instances of very heavy party-wide damage, typically after a DPS phase or a phase change, which you should make sure to aid in a mitigation of, or prepare to heal during. In short, knowing how a fight goes is the best way for a healer to know when to heal and when to focus on secondary tasks, but if it is your first time healing according to the tank buster, party-wide tank buster pattern, while focusing the rest of your time on mechanics is a good way for a new healer to get a party through the fight. There aren't a whole lot of differences between 8-man raids and 24-man raids for healers. At its core, tank busters and party-wide damage will go out in roughly the same pattern. However, many fights features only a single boss, which means only one main tank. The healers on a main tank's party needs to pay extra attention to the tank, so healers from other parties can also apply direct heals to members of another party as well. 24-man raids typically have more instances of party-wide damage and will require more healing overall, and the avoidable AoE tends to be far deadlier, often outright killing a player if hit by it. Furthermore, you will come across cases in which the healers, or even the entire party of another alliance, ends up dying. At this point, you should focus on reviving the healers as soon as possible, and if still alive with its own boss or mini-boss, keep their tank alive for them. In short, 24-man raids tends to be more intensive in terms of incoming damage, with added revival responsibility if another party ends up dead, but in the end, your priorities stay the same. 1. Keep your tank and healers alive. 2. Heal tanks and parties ahead of tank busters and party-wide damage. 3. Aid other parties with revival should your healers die. And 4. Heal players that get hit by avoidable damage. And that is it for today. Hopefully, you found this video helpful and feel a bit more comfortable with the thought of healing in dungeons and raids. As always, if you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe for more, and leave any thoughts or questions down in the comments below. As always, I hope you have a great day and a great week. Have a nice one!